Okay, let's talk now about the asteroids. If you look on your chart, in the lower right-hand corner, just under the 5th house, the top little box there, you'll see it has 5 symbols. The one on the bottom in the box with the circle with a K on top, it says 14 Pisces 48, that's Chiron. Now these and the other 4 are the goddess asteroids. Okay, so they're not actually put onto the wheel. It gets a little complicated when you start putting that many things on. So that's the asteroids. Okay, Chiron, I feel, is very, very important. I think it's a very big piece of the puzzle of our astrology charts. Chiron was only discovered in, what was it, 72 or something like that. No, later than that, 78, late 70s. Anyway, so not everybody uses Chiron, but I think Chiron's quite amazing. The other asteroid, the goddess asteroids, are located between Mars and Jupiter, and in what's called the asteroid belt. And you can tell if you look at a map of our solar system, you can see what looks like, obviously looks like used to be a planet, and there's all these little chunks floating around in the same orbit, and those are the asteroids. And a lot of people think that it was once a planet and that it was destroyed, and that's what's left, the fragments. Okay, that's where the goddess asteroids are located. Chiron is a totally different thing. Chiron is located between Saturn and the planet Uranus, and it has a very strange orbit, and being recently discovered, some people think it might even be a comet, and that it just gets caught in our gravitational field and comes into our solar system every so often. Some call it a planetoid, some an asteroid. Nobody knows for sure what Chiron is, but Chiron, I think, is very vital. Now, Chiron was, in Greek mythology, he was a centaur, half man and half horse, and he was a very famous character in Greek mythology. He was very much a wise man. He was a teacher to a lot of the Greek heroes and the Greek immortals. And he was a prophet, he was a doctor, and he was a musician, and he was many, many things. He taught, in his teacher role, he taught the art of war and the art of peace and healing. And he also taught ethics, music, religion, philosophy, science, and astrology, astronomy, and medicine, and the use of herbs. So he's a very interesting character in that basically his character is about embracing both sides, spirit and animal, man and animal in the same body, as he taught the art of war and he taught the art of healing and peace. So he's very much about embracing the two opposites, the dark side and the light side, within our beings. And he also was wounded, and as he was an immortal, he couldn't die, and he went through great agony as he searched for a cure, and as he went deep within himself during that search for the cure. And he finally ended up switching places with Prometheus in the underworld, in the land of death. And so, in essence, in a chart, Chiron shows us our place of deep wounding and the greatest potential for healing, and from that becoming an inspiration and teacher for others. So I think he's a real important piece of the astrological puzzle that is our psyche. And Chiron's interesting because Venus, it's after Saturn in the solar system, and so it's between Saturn and Uranus. It's considered a bridge because the outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, are considered higher consciousness, more transcendent, out of the personal world. And then the inner planets, Saturn down through the Sun, are considered much more personal planets. So it's kind of, Chiron is like the bridge between the personal to the transpersonal. And since it comes after Saturn, sometimes it's kind of hard to get a grasp really on Chiron until after the Saturn return, until you've really embodied some of that Saturn energy, and then it's kind of like you can move on to Chiron and really get more of a grasp about what Chiron's about. Now your Chiron is in the sign Pisces, which is a water sign, so that gives you a little bit more water quality. And it's in the 8th house, which is in a house of water. So Chiron brings in more water element into your chart, which is nice because that's the one element that you're low on, with one planet in water. And Chiron is very activated in your chart, meaning that it has 5 aspects to the two other planets. So Chiron's pretty important in your chart. Now Chiron in Pisces is real interesting because Pisces is Neptune ruled water, and it's very nebulous. It's so Chiron in Pisces is really about surrendering ego and personality into unity, the one. And the 8th house is also about dissolving the ego and kind of going deep within. And this can be very uncomfortable because it's so nebulous, it feels like you're dissolving. And what's interesting is that your North Node is in the 12th house, and what we talked about earlier, that house of transcendence and kind of allowing yourself just to be one with everything and not have any control or worry about what's happening sometimes. It's interesting because that Chiron in Pisces, and Pisces is the natural ruler, as is Neptune of the 12th house, so it kind of intensifies that energy, having Chiron in Pisces and then in the 8th house, and it kind of helps the North Node in the 12th house. It kind of is an ally in that sense. Now having Chiron in the 8th house is interesting because the 8th house is very much about very, very deep feelings, as all the water houses are. And it's very much about transformation at the deepest level. And traditionally it's death and rebirth. Death meaning death of the ego, and rebirth more like a spiritual rebirth. It's about the occult. It's anything beyond the norm, reality beyond the norm, meaning other realms like the 12th house, other dimensions, other realities. It has to do with psychic abilities. It has to do with sex in the meaning of that it's the urge to merge, meaning that not sex just for the physical act of it, but sexuality in terms of really merging with another person and with God. And so it's the deeper esoteric aspects of sexuality, like tantra sexuality, in terms of for the sake of really merging in a very deep transcendent quality. And so Chiron in this place can show that there's wounding in these areas, and that by healing, going in and feeling these places, the ultimate healing comes in. And through that, then you can be an inspiration for others and perhaps a teacher for others. I call the 8th house the house of agony and ecstasy, because sometimes it's through that ego dissolvement that our greatest agony is, and our attachment to that. And through that comes the greatest ecstasy, as we really merge and become one with another or with God. Now, the 8th house can be tricky. I would say that with with Chiron in the 8th house, there could be some potential to have a lot of illusion as to what's really going on deep inside of yourself. Kind of like that Neptune in the 4th house quality of maybe not completely getting in touch with really what's going on in the deepest level. And so it's really about being very truthful with yourself and what you feel is going on under the surface in yourself and with others, and really allowing yourself to feel even things that are so-called negative. This is a house of great intensity, intense intensity, and it's a feeling of the dark side. The dark side meaning those things that people don't want to talk about, the taboo things about feelings, maybe some anger, some rage, some of the so-called negative feelings that are very real and that everybody does need to own and just allow themselves to feel, and then they can be moved on from. But if you're constantly trying to repress them, they can't be moved on, and they can't really be acknowledged. This dark side is a very important part of everybody's inherent psyche. Everyone has a shadow. Everyone has a dark side. Everyone has that place where they stuff things, in the closet, under the bed, so to speak, inside their psyches. And as I talked about earlier, the 4th house is very much about that, and so is the 8th house. So it's real important to look and acknowledge the so-called dark side and shadow, and know that it's all part of the whole, that there's nothing's bad and nothing's good, and it's about not having attachments to that. And so really owning whatever feelings you're feeling, whether they're so-called negative or positive. And this is where your deep wound is, to really look at this part of yourself. I question if there's a wound around sexuality and that very deep part in yourself. I've done a lot of charts, it seems, with Chiron in the 8th house, and including myself, I have Chiron in the 8th, and every one of those has shown some sexual abuse or molestation, sometimes that they weren't aware of, that came up later, or that they had a memory of barely, or it was very deeply in their unconscious, some kind of abuse on some level, at a very early age, or maybe later in their life. But a lot of times it has been sexual abuse, since this is a house of sexuality. So I wonder if that has possibly happened with you. And you have some other aspects showing that this could be a possibility. Your Chiron is opposed your Pluto, meaning they're exactly in opposition across from each other, on opposite sides. And Pluto being a very intense planet, it's what rules the 8th house, so it's about the transformation, the death and rebirth, and sexuality and power issues. So that points to me once again of some kind of abuse, and maybe if it wasn't sexual, some kind of feminine abuse, maybe not being really acknowledged for being a female, or being in a feminine body, or something along those lines, not really being honored or acknowledged for your sexuality and for your femininity. And you also have Pluto squaring your sun. I'm sorry, Chiron squaring your sun. And that shows a lot of real intense energy also. Now with Chiron opposing Pluto, that's a lot of intense energy to harness. And once again, I would talk about anger or rage or whatever energy that may be repressed, and really encourage you once again to create an outlet for that in whatever way you have to. But really let it out. Really let yourself acknowledge that, there's so-called darker feelings going on, and that it's all part of the whole, and it's not bad or negative. And there's great potential with this Chiron-Pluto energy. They work well together, but they work well together if you're really honest, rawly honest about feelings and about everything in your life and in your feelings. So once nothing is suppressed, then these two can really work well together and in areas of transformation. Now, with that Chiron square the sun, there's a real awareness of spirituality, and there can be a struggle for spirituality because it's a square aspect. And I think the sun kind of being who you are, how you came to shine, and your destiny in some sense, there could be some struggle about who you are and finding your destiny, and really waking up to this. And it's important to work with Saturn very consciously during your Saturn return right now. It's very important to have a real conscious awareness of what's going on, so you can really visualize your goals and what you want to do in the future, because you can really fly after Saturn return, and during Saturn return too, but especially afterwards, because it kind of opens up new areas for you to really work with. And so with this Chiron squaring the sun, it's there might be an identity crisis going on with spirituality and how you identify spirituality. And I think I see in your chart somewhat kind of maybe a struggle at times about spirituality and what it means to you and what it is to you. And I think that you're a very spiritual being, and that you will find this happening more and more. You'll find spirituality integrating more into your life and making more sense to you and who you are more and more in your life. I think especially after Saturn return and as you grow older. And with this Chiron Sun square, there's a real impetus and pressure to find that. And once you're able to work with Saturn in a positive way, then I think you'll really be able to establish your spiritual identity within yourself. I question what your relationship with your father was, and if your relationship with him, whether for better or for worse, has set up role models for you in your present relationships. And with some of your other Saturn aspects, because Saturn also represents the dad, and then Sun can represent the father. With this Sun Chiron square, what's going on with dad, to really look at that and look and see what patterning has been set up from your relationship with him. Do you play rescuer to men, or do men play rescuer to you? That's one avenue that it could take. Do you play victim, or do you play victimizer? Those are some of the roles that Chiron can take in relationships. you have a Chiron aspect to your moon, and it shows that you're very, very sensitive, and potentially have some natural healing ability. And Chiron in the 8th house also shows some potential healing abilities, especially in terms of psychic healing, psychological counseling, that kind of ego process and psychological process, particularly after Saturn returns. So Chiron really can kick in, and you can really start accessing the Chiron energy after Saturn return, and before, but particularly afterwards. You have a Chiron aspect with your Neptune, and that's really wonderful for understanding children and teaching children. It gives a real strong imagination and fantasy life. So that's nice, because it really kind of backs up and supports that North Node in the 12th house in Cancer, because these planets work really well together in a transcendent kind of otherworldly way. And so it's like you still haven't really lost touch with your inner child in certain aspects, and so that's really great for working with kids. And we talked about that with another aspect earlier in your chart. And you have an aspect with Venus, which gives a real dedication to love and ability to sacrifice in relationship, and to really take care of others' needs, sometimes over your own. And this can be really positive, or sometimes it can be not so positive. Maybe you sacrifice too much and you give too much, and you lose yourself. And that's not such a positive way. It's wonderful to be giving and to be devoted, but also to take care of your own needs and not to be a martyr. So this aspect between Chiron and Venus gives a real ability to be very mastered in love and devotion. Definitely the potential for that. So that's Chiron. And as I said, Chiron's pretty potent in your chart, as it has many aspects with other parts of your planets, which means other parts of your psyche. So Chiron's quite well integrated into your chart. Okay, let's go on to the goddess asteroids now. And first, we'll talk about Ceres. That was her Roman name, and in Greek mythology she was known as Demeter. She was Persephone's mother. And Ceres is her symbol is the sickle, and she's the kind of question mark shaped symbol in that little box with Chiron. She's the first one there in 10 degrees Virgo. Now she's in Virgo in the 2nd house. Now Ceres was the great Earth Mother. She's kind of like the moon, but a different aspect, and she's like the Great Mother. She's very nurturing and very caring, and she's very concerned with the welfare of others, particularly children. And she's very comfortable in Virgo, being that she's an Earth Mother. And Virgo is the sign of the harvest, and it's a very earthy sign. And with Ceres in Virgo, and also in the 2nd house which is an Earth house, she very much enjoys working, and very much enjoys applying her skills and her knowledge. And she nurtures through teaching others and through helping others. And she's also about feelings of self-worth, and I would think that your feelings of self-worth would really come from being able to apply your work skillfully, and also in feeling useful to others. Be aware of giving yourself credit even when you're not feeling perfect. because Virgo can be such a perfectionist, and to really give yourself credit and to really feel your self-worth, even if you don't feel perfect. So allow imperfection in yourself and in others, knowing that everything is perfect. And it's also important to take care of yourself, to pamper and nurture yourself also. Now, be aware of caring for others too much, once again, at the expense of your own needs. And know that your self-esteem and your self-worth isn't totally wrapped up in taking care of others. That it makes you feel good and it makes you feel useful, but that's not totally who you are. And really work at valuing yourself and looking at any of the old programs, particularly from childhood, which say that you aren't perfect. And your series placement also shows great sensitivity, even psychic sensitivity to the needs of others, and really being able to nurture them by knowing their needs. And there's a real ability to unconditionally love and selflessly serve others. Okay, now the goddesses, the 4 goddesses represent different aspects of the feminine. And in traditional Western astrology, there's only 2 planets which are feminine, considered feminine, and that's the Moon and Venus. So the reason I like using the goddess asteroids is they bring more feminine qualities into the chart, and whether it's a man or a woman's chart. And so Ceres brings in the aspect of the nurturer, and that earth mother, the earth goddess, harvest mother kind of energy. Now, next we'll go into Pallas Athena, and she's like the diamond shaped with the cross, who's the second one in the box there at 11 degrees Leo. And she's very strong in your chart, very potent. Pallas Athena is, because she's rising in your chart, meaning she's only 1 degree from your ascendant. And any planets that are right there with your rising sign are very powerful, very powerfully placed. And she also has about 6 aspects to other planets in your chart, so she's very dynamic in your chart. Now, Pallas Athena is the goddess. She's very much she was like the feminist back in the Greek and Roman mythological days. She was very much about standing up for people's rights. She was very intelligent, and she was a woman that was allowed to be wise, because women didn't exactly have a lot of rights back in those days. And so she shows a lot of intelligence, and she was also a patroness of the arts and crafts and healing. She has a very strong healing aspect of her, and she was also the warrior goddess in terms that she really stood up for people's rights, and she really stood for justice and equality. And she would have back those days been the modern career woman, the working woman of the world. So she has a few aspects of herself, but basically she's about she's the wise warrior woman, and who justifies and protects, and she has the healing aspect of her also. So in the sign Leo, she would be very dramatic. She would express herself very dramatically. I would think that expressing yourself through dance and art and drama would be very healing for you, and that in the 12th house that she has extremely high intelligence and a connection to spiritual realms and spiritual teachings, and also very connected to the mass mind. Sometimes you just might have a feeling of what's going on in the world, kind of on a mass unconscious level, to really be able to tap into that. And being in the 12th house, there could be possible limitations to the mind, or karma with the mind, or from beliefs, or from your politics. Maybe being outspoken and standing up for things that you believe in, maybe having some opposition to that. And but she shows a real strength of character in your chart, and intelligence and courage, and a very creative aspect. She shows a lot of intuition, once again, a lot of psychic abilities, a lot of strong feminine power, and a real protector of underprivileged people, particularly children, or anybody that's underprivileged in this world. And she does have a square aspect with your Venus, and that could indicate, even though there's all that, she's very strong and very positive in your chart, but with that square it could show some blockage of female energy and sexual and creative energy. And the key for this is to really allow yourself to be receptive and open, and to really balance your male and female within, to really establish your male side also within your chart, and strive for balance in that way. So she's real strong, that warrior goddess energy, rising right up in your chart in the forefront there, as your rising sign. Okay, next we'll talk about Juno, who is also known as Hera in Greek mythology. And Hera brings in the aspect of feminine aspect of partner. She was very much into partnership and equal partnerships, and she was married off to Zeus. And earlier, more matriarchal mythology, she was a goddess in her own right. She was equal to the Great Mother, and she had a lot of her own power and autonomy. And then the patriarchy came along in Greek times, and they took the image of Hera, and they married her off to Zeus, Jupiter, and their marriage was very intense. He didn't treat her good. She gave her power away, so she was very disempowered in the relationship, and it was a very stormy relationship. And so it's about also where we give our power away, and how we really hold our own in a relationship. Because Hera was very much into equal relationships, and really dedicated to marriage and the commitment and making it work at all costs. So she was goddess of marriage and courtship, and also of childbirth, and she also was a protectress of children, and she was very much about sociability. Like, she was the perfect hostess image, and was very charming, and knew just exactly how to dress, and the makeup, and that whole Aphrodite Venus kind of energy of the feminine. And she was very much about standing up for women's equal rights, and she represents the powerless in relationship, meaning battered wives and abused children, victims, that whole thing. So she brings in that whole aspect of the feminine. And she's also very strong in your chart. She has 8 aspects with other planets in your chart, so she's very active in your chart. She's also in Virgo. It's interesting because 3 out of 4 of your goddess asteroids are in the sign Virgo, an Earth sign. And Virgo is the Virgin, and very much about perfection, striving for perfection. So Juno in Virgo would very much be about desiring perfection in relationship. And once again, a working relationship could work very well with Juno in this placement. And be aware in relationship of your demand for perfection and possible overly criticalness. She needs financial and material security, and she likes her attachments and her possessions. Now she has a square aspect to your sun, so that means to be very aware of power struggles in relationship, and the balance between independence and intimacy. And she's got harmonious aspect with Venus, so those work really nice together. That you have a great ability to create a lot of love and beauty in relationships. Now, she's conjunct with your Pluto, so I would imagine you would go through deep personal transformation through your partnerships and your relationships. Very deep transformation, that there's probably a lot of emotional and sexual intensity and a lot to be learned in these areas. There could be power struggles, there could be domination and control issues, and the resolution to this is really owning your own power and allowing trust and vulnerability to really come through, and dealing with whatever issues come up around allowing trust and vulnerability. It's also about owning the intensity within yourself and really learning to forgive. You might find yourself attracted to very intense men and wanting to live that out, that Juno-Pluto aspect out, through relationship, through a lot of intensity. So it's about owning that part in yourself and being willing to really move on and forgive, and not be too attached to ego, and to really be willing to transform and transcend in relationship. Okay. The last one is Vesta, and she was known as Hestia in Greek mythology. Now, Hestia is very much about, she was the goddess of the hearth, and she was very much honored in Greek and Roman times. She's one of the few goddesses who were really honored. She didn't have anything terrible happen to her, which so many of the goddesses did, and they were really fragmented in their psyches. Vesta was always very honored because she was the goddess of the hearth, and in Greek times they always had a hearth burning in the middle of the room to honor her, because they felt that she was very much protective of their space, their home space. And she was the goddess of the eternal flame. There was always a flame burning in her temples, and that was representing spirit. So she was very religious and very devotional. She brings in that aspect of the feminine, of the devotional temple priestess, or modern day nun, I guess she would be now. And also she's very much about your work and your path and your dedication and focus to that. And Vesta in your chart is also in Virgo, and that would give a real intense focus and drive to perfection in your work and in everything that you do, in your spirituality, and it would make you very supportive of others and in their work. And once again, I would really caution towards being overly critical and expecting too much perfection with all that Virgo there. She shows great devotion to your family and caring for others, and she has an aspect with Mercury that shows a very highly developed and focused mind, who could really get into ideas and research and teaching. And she has an aspect with your Venus, a very harmonious aspect, that really validates and supports your feminine energy in yourself and your others, and very much supports artistic expression. And Vesta's kind of where we center, since she was the center of the hearth. in mythology. It's kind of that place deep within ourselves that we can center inside of ourselves. And so she's in Virgo, and she's in your second house, and those are both earthy signs. And Virgo being very dedicated to work and service. Vesta is also very dedicated to work and service. So I would think that that would be a real place for you to focus yourself in some ways, and to really center yourself is through your work, whatever that is, whether it's internal work or external work, and that drive for perfection, and not in the overly critical sense, but really the drive for perfection in everything that you see and everything that you are. Okay, those are the goddesses. Now, what I'm going to talk about is aspects, and I've mentioned aspects quite a bit by now. And that is in the inner circle in your chart, all the lines which connect the planets to each other. And the aspects, as I described earlier, are the relationships between the planets and how the planets connect with each other. And that really brings in a lot of psychology and depth to the chart. It brings all these bits and pieces of the planets and the psyche in together and makes it much more of a whole. Now, I won't go over all of them, but I'll go over the main ones that I think are important and that need to be looked at. You have Sun square Pluto, and that's very intense. That can probably feel very frustrating and pressurized, somewhat like a volcano, and it could make you very defensive. It can give you very powerful drive, and I would suggest really following the middle path here. This could be a real extreme feeling of not feeling like you can really express yourself or share yourself with other people. Really show who you are, truly who you are, and I would really encourage you to transform any negative thoughts that you have about yourself and about frustration, about expression, and really allow yourself to feel. It's a fine line, because it's like allowing yourself to feel negativity and feel things that might not be considered nice, but not getting stuck in it. Like, feel it, okay, and then move on from it and create positive thought through that. And so it's walking that middle path between the two. And you have a sun sextile Jupiter, and that's great, because that Jupiter energy really balances a lot of this Pluto-Sun square. It brings in a lot of optimism and a lot of faith. And the neat thing about charts is that, you know, we have a combination of everything. We have, you know, some things that are more difficult to work on, and we have things that are great, and they always balance each other out. There's always this aspect that we need to work a little harder on, but then there's always that other aspect that comes along and creates a lot of balance. So that's the beauty of the chart and the aspects. And your chart in particular is really neat in that way. Every time there's like a more difficult aspect, there's one that just comes along and just really helps balance it. So it's like it's an ally, and it helps you work on some of the more difficult things. So that Jupiter's real nice in that respect, where it comes along, and because Pluto can be really heavy and a real repressive feeling sometimes, and that pressure feeling, where Jupiter comes along and just opens it up and brings in that faith. Now, you have an aspect between Moon and Venus, and I would say with this aspect, be aware of others taking advantage of you. Learn to say no, and learn to take care of your own needs. That's real important. To not worry about being too nice, and to learn how to say no. And also look and to look inside yourself to see if there's any guilt that motivates you to make you feel like you must serve everybody. Is there guilt? And if so, where does this come from? Does it come from wanting to be liked, to be needed, or to keep the harmony at all costs? So look at that and really work at communicating your needs and your true feelings without fearing what others will think. Learn to love yourself and find out what's in the way of doing that. And I'll really emphasize again to communicate what your needs are. First to yourself and then to others without worrying what others might think. Now you have a Saturn trine your moon, which is really nice. It really helps bring in a lot of stability to your emotions, and provides a real solid foundation for your emotions, and it helps create love for yourself. Just remember to let yourself know that you do love yourself, and remember to tell others that you do also. Now, this Venus square Saturn that I talked about earlier when we were talking about Saturn, I'll reiterate these again because this is a very important aspect. It brings up issues of self-love, self-worth, rejection, loneliness, and I imagine that this probably stems from childhood. That there's a feeling of a deep need of wanting to be filled by love from another. And when you're not fulfilled, that you may feel very rejected and very lonely. And it's important to accept others for what they are and what they are able to give, and not to focus on what they can't give and what you don't get, but to really give thanks for your blessings and what you do have and what you do get. And to look at those areas of self-love and realize that you do need to fill yourself up and not to expect it from others, and then it will naturally come from others. Now, Venus is in opposition to Neptune, and that's kind of tricky because it can make one very, very idealistic in love, overly idealistic, and then consequently disappointed when people can't meet up to those ideals. And then after that disappointment, trust issues can arise, and feeling like somebody wasn't trustworthy because they couldn't meet up to the ideals. So be aware of that, and be willing to be realistic in love, which I also think you are. On the other hand, because you have that Saturn in the 7th house and you have a lot of Saturn aspects, so there's probably two sides going on, possibly. This aspect definitely gives a lot of creativity and inspiration, and you need to start with realistic projects, so you don't start out too idealistic and then you're disappointed. It's important to be realistic and not overly idealistic. And it also shows a need to transform material needs into spiritual needs. I see this strongly at places in your chart, and I mentioned it a little while ago, of really integrating who you are as a spiritual being, and I think this will be becoming in more strongly from Saturn return on. Who you are as a spiritual being and what your connection to God and Spirit really is, and maybe incorporating more spiritual ideals into your life. Now there's a Mercury-Saturn square, and that can feel very constrictive to the mind and to communication and learning and imagination, as that's what Mercury rules. It may make you feel frustrated in your learning capability at times, and once you learn to work with Saturn and the hard work, be willing to work hard and have the discipline and move along even if it might feel slow at times, there's great potential here, because once you learn something you will never forget it. It will really be a part of you. What's interesting is you've got Mercury square Mars, and this once again really balances out that Saturn square. It's kind of just the opposite of a Saturn square Mercury, so it'll really balance out and bring in some more energy and some more dynamic energy into the Mercury. So that's nice, and that balances that out. Now you